Speak on new realities, but also sort of echoing the period that your book is talking about. In recent years, we've seen an increase in indigenous militancy.
Mm-hmm.
And even just very recently, what was it, like last week, we saw the Black community in Lincoln Heights arm up and drive out Nazis and fascists in their neighborhood. Um, with obviously the election of Trump and the contradictions that entails, are we coming up to another period of armed struggle, so to speak? You talk about, in the 1960s and 70s, that was, the first time since, I think you said, like 1865, that we saw organized Black masses fight, shoot back, is the quote you use. Are we close to that again? Are the machinations at play, so to speak?
Well, if that is the case, as I've been stressing, I think that the folks who are advocating that should have an analysis. That's one of the lessons of the book on the table. An analysis of the correlation of forces domestically, a class analysis, who will be our allies, who will be our antagonists, above all, an international analysis. If there are those who are leaning in that direction, I trust and I hope they don't have to tell us publicly, but I trust and I hope that they've been in touch with our comrades in Cuba, for example, that they've been in touch with our comrades in Quebec, for example, that perhaps they've tried to rally international support, for example. So that would be my only cautionary note, so to speak, with regard to a replay of the 1960s and 1970s. And even in the interregnum between 1865 and, say, 1966, when the West Coast Panthers were organized, you had spates of armed resistance. I even talk about that in the book. I mean, for example, the Deacons for Defense in Louisiana. I even talk about how in the early 1960s they were visiting Northern California and influencing folks in their direction. This is before 1966, I should mention. And I mentioned that in the South in particular, there have been a long tradition of folks maintaining weaponry in their homes. After all, people were hunters to a certain degree. You had people who were military veterans who had learned about weaponry thanks to the U.S. military, for example. And as I also talk about in the book, in the 1930s at the Lenin School in Moscow, admittedly, in terms of training U.S. comrades to go fight on behalf of the Spanish Republicans in the 1930s, but still, people were trained in guerrilla warfare. People were trained in constructing Molotov cocktails, trained in urban street fighting, for example. I go on at length with regard to that particular issue. So once again, if folks are leaning in that direction without seeming overly self-absorbed, I hope they look at this book. So that, because one of the reasons I wrote this book was to try to excavate what some of the mistakes were, which led to people being driven into exile, people serving long prison sentences, people being assassinated, killed by the authorities, etc. And as the saying goes in Washington, the second kick of the mule is not necessarily educational. You should learn from the first kick of the mule, for example. And let us hope that particular lesson is absorbed.